So I'm here this morning with Mark Reid. Mark started as a lawyer. He's a paper maker. He does Zen and he does podcasting. It's an unusual connection. Let's see what it's all about. Good morning, Mark.
Good evening here, but yeah,
You happen to be an American in Japan, don't you?
I am, whether I like it or not.
Tell
I
us,
do like it.
tell us about how you became a lawyer and your sort of original career. Yeah. What's your platform before we start talking about paper making and other things?
So I sort of consider that I had two career lives before my current one, and the lawyering was the second one. The first was teaching. I did a lot more teaching in the beginning, and and that involved. I mean, my first job out of college or out of uni, as you Brits say, it was here in Japan. I was teaching in junior high schools, and I worked for a local board of education in Nagano Prefecture. I won't bore you with all the details. But I came and went from Japan back to the United States. So I went to grad school and got a master's in philosophy and ethics. Which, what are you going to do with that? And then, right, there's not a
Well,
lot of classified saying philosopher wanted.
now I would say, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah. And so while in so doing that, I was a graduate teaching assistant at Florida State. So basically, my first, 4 or 5 years outside of university were spent teaching, and then I did a bit of bouncing around, and then in 2004, 2005, I was teaching at universities here in Japan, and that's where I met my wife. We didn't get married then, but I met her and we dated back then. Um, so the first few years, and then I left and went to law school in the United States, then became a lawyer. But those first few years were spent teaching. Um, yeah, and so as for why that transition, I don't know. I didn't want to. ESL, English as a second language, teachers don't. There's a plateau, and I had already hit it. I was teaching at a university, and there's just nowhere to go financially in that field. And so I thought, well, I can do more. So I went and became a lawyer. And long story short of that, it just, I realized how miserable that life was. So then I became a paper maker. That's the long story short.
And forgive me for using the word lawyer. You say attorney, don't you?
They're both okay. They're synonymous in the states. I know you have barristers and solicitors there, but we say attorney, lawyer interchangeably.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think ethics is an excellent profession for the modern. But
Well,
anyway,
that's why I had to get out of law.
yeah.
I didn't do anything unethical, but it did conflict with some of my personal morals.
Okay.
There's a difference between morality and ethics.
All right then. And these days you make specialist paper using the old traditional method. I had a look at sort of some of that yesterday when I was sort of mugging up for the interview. But for the uneducated person, could you explain how you make paper from trees?
Well, we do the whole process, and we do it in the same way that they've done it for about 1,000 years in Japan. And so we grow the trees and we harvest them. We usually harvest them in the winter. So we just finished, back in December, we finished, um, we have about 6 fields that we go to, and uh, we cut the trees down, then we bundle them together, and we put them in a giant kiln to kind of steam them for about 2 or 3 hours. And then when you steam them, I'm just running through the whole process here. We peel off the outer layer. I mean, you could call it the bark, but it's a little bit thicker than what we generally conceive of as bark. It really looks like skin coming off of a tree trunk. And we just use that part. We only wind up using about 5% of the actual tree. We use the other stuff for other things, so it's not wasteful. But anyway, we peel that off. We dry it by hanging it out in the sun. We scrape the impurities off of it, and there's a whole process. And then we put it into a kind of industrial sized blender that makes it into a pulp. We mix with water and this sort of tree sap that's kind of a glue, or just makes it bind. And we use a giant frame in which we sort of sift through the sap, which creates a layer. and then we put that layer, we stack it, and it's still wet then, and we let that dry a little bit, and then we actually dry it on a kind of metal heat frame, which makes it into individual paper sheets. It's an arduous process. It's a lot to do. But it's, high quality paper used for art and calligraphy and doors, Japanese doors, all kinds of things.
So, I mean, how long does it take from start to finish, from beginning to end?
Well, I get that question a lot. You know, if you just did it one after another, the thing, we do it all year round, in essence. But because once you've dried the kozo, the mitsumata, those are the trees we use. You can store them, and we could do it. We can pick it back up 6 months later. But if you did it from start to finish, never mind the actual growth of the tree, that's going to take a year to 2 years. But that aside, it would take between 10 to 14 days to make paper from the time you cut the tree.
Okay, fine. I mean, what you've explained resonates rather well with me. I used to formulate pharmaceuticals, so putting in binders into sort of powders, and then mixing them up and granulating them, and then squashing them into tablets is cookery, really, as far as but it's an art. There's an art form in it as well, and of course a detailed process. So, what made you make paper in the end? I mean, you haven't. The why question is important here. Is this to solve your ethical dilemmas, or is,
Well,
is paper free of ethical problems?
well, that was fortunately a secondary result. But the short answer to your question is a woman, of course. So that's the answer to most of life's conundrums, right? Um, yeah, I had mentioned that I had dated my wife back when I met her in 2004, 2005, but I left and went back to the United States, went to law school. We kept in touch, and for the most part, that was just like I would contact her on her birthday, and vice versa, and that'd be it. But then around 2018, we struck up the conversation, and on social media a little bit more. And I said, hey, why don't you come visit me in the States? So she did. She met my family, and everything went well. And in 2019, she said, why don't you come visit me in Japan? So I did, and I just never left. And she was doing that. So, her occupation became my occupation.
You joined the family business then.
Exactly. And it felt and still feels a lot better than lawyering. So
Okay.
I'm happy.
That brings us on. It sounds quite a peaceful existence making paper.
I love it. I'm grateful every day. I'm like, because I could easily, there was so close, such a point where there was a point in which I really debated, what am I doing? I'm walking away from, a lucrative salary of being an attorney in the United States. I was working well, not when I decided to come to Japan, but earlier I had left a large law firm, a quite prestigious law firm in the United States. And but I was still practicing on my own when I made the jump over here to Japan. And I did think, like, man, am I sure I want to do this? So I was really close. I was teetering on which way to go. I'm so glad I did. It's such a much more, I sleep well at night now, and I didn't before.
All right, fine. So, going back to, I suppose, where we started this conversation, this and the peaceful pursuit of papermaking leads us to the Channel Zen and podcasting. So you've made something like 100 plus podcasts interviewing interesting characters around the world, and within that podcast, you have a segment around sort of Zen thinking or applied Zen thinking. Could you explain how that began and what you do and all the rest of it?
Sure. Well, yeah, I was a double major in college, and I look back and I majored in the two things that you're not supposed to talk about, at a party or something: political science and religion. And yeah, and so the law degree was for was a secondary postgraduate work on the political science end, and but I got a master's in philosophy and ethics. So, well, my point is, I had a background in religious studies and philosophy, and I also had a background in I minored in Japanese. So I had lived here and worked here. So I certainly didn't grow up a Zen practitioner. I grew up in the American South, so I was a Southern Baptist, Protestant, and it's a long evolutionary process to answer your question. But I had studied Asian religions in college. I lived in Japan, and since I've done a lot more extensive study in Zen, and I just find it's a good, I don't know, way of life, a good philosophy. It's to me, it's not a religion. It's secular. You could be a Christian, you could be an atheist, and adhere to Zen principles, and be a happier person for doing it. So did that answer your question, or at least part of it?
It does. It's part of it. So, a typical Zen podcast. What are you trying to do with these people?
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, and in that way, because yeah, a lot of times people they hear Zen and they think, I don't know, a Buddhist monk sitting meditating for 5 hours at the top of a mountain or something. And I make it clear on the podcast that my podcast is not for the aspiring Buddhist monk. It's for regular folks. It's for regular people. And so my goal, my aim is to provide a little, calm in this hectic world. You turn on the news and everything's bad news these days, and we're all filled with anxiety. It seems like more than ever before, which doesn't make sense in the 21st century when we've got all these technological advancements and life is supposed to be easier, not harder. And but everybody's suffering from depression and anxiety. So, and I don't want to just have a podcast about, well, you should go be a Zen monk at the top of a mountain. That doesn't do anybody any good. I want to have one that offers practical, pragmatic solutions for regular people living regular lives.
So, if we did a sort of short segment on Zen, obviously there's make love, not war. There's make, but what's beyond paper? I mean, what's your sort of your own sort of take on this for everyday life?
Well, the starting point I would give to anyone is as much as reasonably possible, and that first little segment's important, but as much as reasonably possible, um, live in the present moment. And what that means, what that entails, is that, I mean, and this is why I say as reasonably possible. We can't help our brains. It floats into the past all the time, and you relive moments either of like embarrassment or of glory. You might think back your high school days when you scored the winning touchdown, or you might think about that time that girl rejected you or whatever, and you feel those feelings all over again. And okay, that's fine. Look back in the rearview mirror every now and then, but don't live in the past. And likewise, we plan our futures as if we had anything to do with it. We plan our futures in a way where we think this is going to happen and that's going to lead to that and that's going to lead to that. It's fine to plan a little bit and to be prepared, but the future pretty much almost never works out the way we plan it to. So, when you catch yourself in those moments of drifting off into the past or daydreaming about a future that hasn't and probably won't happen, that's fine. Don't beat yourself up. Just bring your attention back to the present moment. When you're talking to somebody or whether you're washing the dishes or whatever, be in the now as much as reasonably possible.
That's very important. So I will put all the links in the video here, but what's the easiest way for people to find the Zen podcast?
Well, the most the name, I purposely named it something that would stick in your head. So it's called Zen Sammich, and I've since learned that the Queen's English speaking country, well, I guess you say King's English now, don't you? King's English speaking countries don't use the
past, Mark. We're still using the Queen.
Oh, really? Okay. No.
Okay, go on.
But in America, we sort of use sandwich as a slang for the word sandwich. And so you can just go to zensammich.com, or because it's such a distinct name, if you plug it into Google or Apple or Spotify or Amazon Music, it's going to come up. I don't have any competitors with that name. So it's going to come up. Yeah.
A unique. It's an orphan then. So I being having estuary English, I thought it was sandwich to start with. So I will put it in as a link in here to make sure people can spell it. But as you say, it's easy to find. That's brilliant. Turning
Yeah.
full circle where we began, and just where you just mentioned about living in the present moment. Living in the past isn't just a Jethro Tull song. Brings us to sort of the current situation of people who prefer to look to the past because it seemed a more rosy area. And I know that you have an American accent, it seems. So you might just we have Brexit, you have Trump. I mean, any predictions for how the future's going to go for Mr. Trump?
Well, as I just warned, predictions, rarely turn out the way we think. It's why I love sports, by the way, but I no longer watch. I used to be such a sports junkie that I would watch the talk shows waiting for the game and listen to all the pundits guess what's going to happen, and I realized how silly it was to do that because they never get it right. And but with that said, here I'm going to predict that well, Trump's going to run again, and he's already started bashing his rivals that are on his side, that are on the Republican side. And, I think he's potentially going to rip apart the party. He's going to split it right down the middle. It's already divided because there are people who are gravitating towards Rick DeSantis, the Florida governor, or Nikki Haley. She's a woman from South Carolina who was actually Trump's ambassador to the UN. And she's running, and they each already have their constituency, and they're already dividing themselves up. And he doesn't play nice, he's already name calling, and so it really is. I think he's going to cause a division in the party, and whoever they put up. Well, it depends on who the Democrats put up. If Biden runs again and gets the nomination, or what. But I think I would give the upper hand to the Democrats at this point.
Perhaps Donald should take the advice you never gave and retire to a monastery.
That's just not his style, I'm afraid.
No, I realised that, but just a random.
So Ron DeSantis. I said Rick. I knew that was wrong. Ron DeSantis. Anyway.
Okay. Okay, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. I will put the links up to the various things that you do. And I don't think we're going to start exporting paper around the world because you sound like you've got a very good niche business there. But the podcast is well worth a listen to anyone that's out there. And so, yes, thank you very, very much, Mark.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.